A very good afternoon to you all on a sunny October day in Harare. It's been raining this week. We had our first rains. It was pouring. I love it when it's raining. I think Harare looks lovely when it's green. What are your
Absolutely,
thoughts?
I completely agree. And overcast, cloudy weather makes for fantastic running weather, so I quite enjoy it as well.
Do you actually run in the rain?
Well, I don't enjoy sitting out in the rain, but if I'm out on a run and it starts raining, I don't mind it at all.
All right. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Well, for some of us, we just love it because Harare just turns green, and the burbs are just lovely. Even you drive down Second Street or any of the roads, they're just looking lovely.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just, it's. I think it definitely makes aesthetically, we get Harare at its best
Yeah.
when it's raining.
And we get the first bout of Majanje, right? Do you like Majanje?
No,
All right, okay.
I'm not a fan.
Actually, I'm a fan. Like I'm a big fan, especially the October Majanje.
Ah,
But by the time we get to December, I think it's just not the appropriate ones. But I think late October, early November Majanje. I don't know. Maybe it's just something that I've had since I was a kid, and that's something that I actually look forward to every year.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, what are you drinking?
Yeah, today I've gone to the Far East, all the way to Japan. The Japanese actually have a recent but very exquisite whiskey tradition. And so I'm trying out one of their blends called Nika Days, which apparently is supposed to be a little bit peaty and a little bit sweet. I'm experimenting with that today.
Okay.
And you seem to have quite a few things put together in front of you there. What concoction are you trying to put together?
Well, it's a mocktail, and it's something that you'll be familiar with. Lemon lime tonic. Usually, people then switch it up with gin, but for some of us,
For you
teetotalers,
yeah.
then we have to put a bit of spin to it. So I like to put a bit of sweetness to it. So a little bit of honey and a little bit of ginger ale, and it speaks to me. It speaks to me.
Well, yeah,
It's the right
it's
summer drink. But
it's less
it's not
boring
yet
than
summer.
always.
It's not yet summer. Apparently, it's still spring.
Really, I think in this part of the world we only have two seasons. We really just have summer and winter.
Well, according to the meteorological reports or guys, they tell us that it's summer only starts in December.
So what? So we're coming out of winter, so we're in spring.
We're in spring, and spring is right through to end of November or so. But really, as far as I'm concerned, if it starts raining and
it's hot.
the temperatures are high, then
Although I
it's
found the
summer.
weather was somewhat temperamental lately. I mean, so you're gonna have a really bright sunny day, and then after dusk, it can get quite nippy.
No, true.
Which is not normally the case, normally. So I guess it's fair to call it spring because in a typical Zimbabwean summer, it doesn't get nippy even in the evening. It actually stays quite hot.
Yeah, that's true. So today we want to do it. It's a special edition. I mean,
Well, the
we don't
producer's
have-
away, so
Yeah,
we
he's
can
away,
we can
so
we can we can get up to whatever we want around
Yeah,
here.
yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
we can talk about things that are interesting. Something that's actually happening in the world, and then we'll come down to what's happening in Zimbabwe. Then we've got quite a number of things that we want to cover. ZESA. We've had power cuts. I think some of the worst power cuts we've had in the last few years. I mean, 16 hours of power cuts, and that's starting to affect our industry, and that's obviously has a downstream effect on our GDP and everything else. But we'll talk about that. I've also started reading Hepton Bonyongwe's book, and I was more interested in the economics, but it's far and in between. I don't know what that says, but anyway, we'll get into that as well. You haven't started reading the book, right?
No, I don't have a copy as yet, but I'm gonna get one this weekend,
Yeah,
and we can compare notes.
And in the comment section, let's hear what you guys think about that, right? But we're going to talk about two entrepreneurs that have done something significant in the last week, globally as well as in Africa. So first is your favorite person in the whole wide world. Elon Musk.
I
So maybe speak to what Elon Musk did.
I don't think that's the way I would characterize it, although I'm a huge fan.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
one of my, actually, you're being quite polite. One of my friends, very derogatively insists that I'm in a cult.
Elon cult.
You know, which I find quite hilarious.
It's not far. It's not far from the truth,
So,
if we're honest.
so I guess you're being much more charitable. I've been called worse. It's okay.
Yeah.
I've got a thick skin.
So, but let's talk about what he's done with SpaceX. How significant is that, and what does it mean? And we, contextualize innovation that happens with NASA, with government, and innovation that's actually happening in the private sector. And maybe we can then bring it down to Zim, and then we'll talk about Dangote, because he now has a refinery,
Yeah.
and his net worth has actually doubled over that period because of the refinery. Government has come to the table, just introducing an EPZ, an export processing, an economic processing zone within where the refinery is actually located. And we've seen some significant gains where Nigeria will, no longer import fuel. They will be able to produce their own fuel. So that's significant again, where private sector has played a big role, and not just private sector, but actually entrepreneurs. So let's start with Elon, SpaceX. What does that actually mean? And especially for our viewers and for the Zimbabwean context, what does it mean? Is that as life-changing as Elon would like us to believe?
Well, look, I don't know about life-changing. I think that's rather dramatic. I think, look, so there's the technical aspect, which for some of us space nerds, we were absolutely blown away and delighted and, ecstatic about, the fifth integrated flight test of, this experimental rocket that they're, developing. So they basically, the booster of this, the booster of this rocket, which is basically the world's largest flying object. It's bigger than an Airbus A380. So it went up into orbit, and then it came back at supersonic speed, and it slowed down, and it was caught by this tower. So which had us all in a static frenzy on when it happened. I think over the weekend. In terms of the significance of this, from an economic standpoint, what it does is it dramatically lowers the cost per kg or ton to put anything into orbit. So actually, I can segue a little bit and just explain, some of the history in terms of satellite technology versus cellular technology, for example. So in the early 80s, there was a big debate about what the future of telecoms was going to look like. Were we going to have a future with cell tower based telecommunications, where you have these cell towers and then they communicate to your cell phone, and they're terrestrial, right? And then there was a company called Iridium that took a view that actually no, it's not going to be terrestrial, it's going to be satellite based. So they're going to put up these satellites, and your cell phones would actually come online by communicating with satellites. And what happened is it turned out it was much, much cheaper to roll out a terrestrial network than to put satellites into space and try and build a telecoms business. So everywhere in the world, you've got terrestrial-based cellular communications, and in esoteric instances, like on ships and planes and places in the middle of nowhere, people use satellite phones, which are incredibly expensive. That's kind of changed.
So sorry to just draw you in.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we'll talk about satellites,
Yeah.
but here we want to talk specifically about SpaceX and its mission, which is multi-planetary livelihood, the possibility that we could live in multiple planets. And how significant is that? Is that life-changing for somebody who stays in Dotito or in Harare? Why is that such a big thing? And being able to reuse the rockets, why is that? It's what, a 19-story rocket? Why is that such a big thing?
Yeah, so it's not significant. I think for the most part, to the average human being, everywhere on the globe, it's not a big deal. But if you're, I think in terms of the aspirations, it's a grand vision to colonize other planets, to make us spacefaring. But in terms of in terms of your life tomorrow, how it's going to affect, is it going to affect the price of eggs? No. But it is a grand exploratory endeavor that has inspired and captured the imagination of a lot of people. But in terms of its impact today,
well, it's not about the impact today, but even in the future. What's the significance? Because it's not like Elon started this. Even NASA has been doing this. So space exploration has been happening way before. I mean, since the 1960s. Why is it such a big thing?
So actually,
what's the impact?
So I think Elon's endeavor in this respect is actually unique. If you think about what happened in the 60s, that was not really driven by the spirit of exploration or to make life multiplanetary. That was really a competition between the Americans and the Soviets, and it was military. It was about, the Soviets were the first nation on Earth to put an object into orbit, the Sputnik satellite. And that really spooked the Americans. And then they decided to, and that set off the space race. So that wasn't really about space exploration or trying to make life multiplanetary. That was really a military competition between two great powers. What Elon is doing is completely different in that he seeks to make life multiplanetary. And his vision is basically based on this idea that you have extinction level events on Earth, right? So about 65 million years ago, there's a meteor that hit Earth and basically made more than 90% of the species extinct. That's what killed the dinosaurs. And basically what he's saying is that there is risk that we will have an extinction level event, at some point in the future, whether it's another meteor, whether it's something much worse than COVID, whether it's nuclear war. And so to guarantee the continuance of civilization, it's kind of like a hedge. The idea is to have life on different planets. So if something really awful happens here, at least there'll be humans somewhere else, and the light of consciousness will continue to shine. So that's really the vision, which is...
And I think it's nothing unique with Elon. I think that was always the goal, even in 1960s. The idea was first to explore, because the whole idea of an adventure, when you think about Christopher Columbus or even Bantu migration, or
no, but
no matter where you go, there's idea that in exploring we will find something.
Yeah, but I like that I like that you use Christopher Columbus, and thankfully the producer's not here, so we can segue a little bit and be. I want to push back. I want to push back.
What are you pushing back? Because you haven't even heard the argument.
No, you mentioned Columbus, right? He wasn't an explorer. He actually was. There was an economic reason for his voyage.
No, what I mean is the idea of the human exploration.
Yes.
Then the endeavor that let's go out there and let's seek whatever is out there, even if we don't know the immediate benefits of what we are going out there to find.
Yeah.
And I think that space exploration primarily was incumbent upon that there's a whole entire universe outside of Earth. Let's go out there
for sure,
and let's discover it. And then the idea of a multiplanetary existence has been here way before Elon Musk.
No, the idea has been there, but I don't think it's been pursued in a serious way until
NASA has poured in billions. I think that what Elon has done is he's made it more efficient. That actually we can do more of this, because putting people up in space is a very costly exercise, right? And we haven't been able to do it in a major way. So since we started in the 1960s, I think that Elon has put up more spaceships up in space than we've ever done in human history. And I think that's the significant thing. It's really down to efficiency. Because if we can get more and more people up in Mars and the moon and start exploring, then we'll start discovering. And that's the thing about entrepreneurship. And I thought that's what you're going to get into. Because I think that the lady Otito or somebody in Harare, what they need to understand is this, that entrepreneurs play in the realm of uncertainty. We don't know what's out there. Now, you're not going to get the answer today. And you need entrepreneurs like Elon who say, we don't know what's out there, but the are these few immediate benefits. Like Christopher Columbus would be saying, you know what, we want to fight the fastest route
To India, to the spices.
right? That was what was motivating him to get the funding to actually go out and explore, right? But in exploring, in a very uncertain environment, you then discover something.
Yeah.
And I think that's something similar to what Elon is doing. So, and in that exploration in itself, there's the inspiration bit that everybody now looks at, you know, what he's doing, and we feel good about it because it just shows the ends of human endeavor and what we can possibly do as entrepreneurs. And I think that's what the significance of this is. It's life-changing because if we can have more and more flights up in space and we can explore, who knows what we can discover? We know there's gold out there. We know that perhaps there are things that we can't grow on Earth that perhaps we could grow in Mars. That could be life-changing. So even in terms of poverty, in terms of tourism, for example, I mean, I would love to go
Spend some time in orbit.
Yeah. I mean, if I had the money. And perhaps that's what's going to happen, that the cost of actually going to the moon or going to Mars is going to be drastically lower, and people can
that's
explore.
what technology does, right? It costs significantly.
So, and I think that's the message we need to preach, that perhaps the benefits, people may not see the direct benefits today, but I think in terms of human endeavor, what we've discovered.
Well, we already see the direct benefits, you know, maybe not of what we saw happen over the weekend,
go ahead.
but of the enterprise. So, notwithstanding the fact that SpaceX was founded to make life multiplanetary, you know, it has to be funded, right? And, you know, he's not going out into the world cap in hand. He reduced the cost of putting mass into orbit, and he realized that there was an opportunity to build a business like Starlink, is, and the revenues.
That's an off-spin.
Yeah, so it's an off-spin of this.
That's actually
bigger
affecting
vision
someone in Otito, directly affecting
today, because
somebody
even
in
if they're
Otito.
not using Starlink, what Starlink has done in this market and in most markets is it's actually reduced the cost of broadband. So there will always be these, ancillary benefits so whatever the vision is, when new technology is developed, we figure out other use cases that are not necessarily part of the primary vision, but that are actually useful today to people on the ground. So we're definitely benefiting from Starlink, and in fact, this bigger rocket is going to put Starlink version 2 satellites into orbit, and these, I believe, will actually be able to directly compete with fiber and cellular networks, because they'll do 10 times the broadband of the current fleet. So that's something that will definitely affect people on the ground here in Harare and in Otito.
So the other question I have, which affects policymakers, why is Elon able to achieve something that, and this is just one individual, what NASA hasn't been able to do in the last 50, 60 years?
Well, look, and even if you actually look at the original achievement of NASA, like its biggest claim to fame is putting man on the moon, right? So the Apollo project, I think it started in the early 60s, and the last trip to the moon was in the early 70s. That project employed 400,000 people. At its peak, they were spending 4.4% of the US federal budget just on Apollo, right? And to put that into proper perspective, today the US spends less than that on their defense budget, right? And they spend almost $1 trillion a year on defense. So they were spending this kind of money on Apollo every year, right, for almost 10 years. Okay, so it was obscenely expensive. So governments, by their nature, whenever they embark on any kind of project, they're just incredibly inefficient and wasteful in terms of resources. Whereas the private sector, you have to make
He's able to achieve more with far less.
Exactly.
That's what Elon has proved.
Because you don't have limited resources, right? The reason why the US government could spend this ridiculous amount of money is because they basically had
taxpayers' money.
Taxpayers' money. It's like, an almost unlimited, pool of resources that they could deploy. Whereas an entrepreneur, you've got the capital that you have as an individual, perhaps what you raise from your family and friends and what venture capitalists will give you, and that's it. And
how about the argument that actually Elon is still getting money from the taxpayer? Because it's NASA that's literally been paying him. As SpaceX, have they raised any money? Because it's still a private institution. I know that they want to list.
No,
at some point.
So it's
But
not publicly
what's
listed.
what's the argument? What's your reply? Or, how do you feel about the argument that actually is the taxpayer that's still funding it?
Well, I would make the case that it's benefited from some taxpayer money to the extent that they got contracts from NASA to develop and build certain capabilities, but they were never taxpayer funded. So the company was founded by Elon in 2002.
No. Taxpayer is, if you're getting a contract from government, it's the taxpayer who's paying.
Yeah, but if it's not like it's a freebie. It's an arm's length commercial transaction.
No one said it's a freebie.
Yeah.
But the argument is it's not exactly.
So I think
private capital.
So certainly in the
certainly
in the formative years of that business, their primary customer was NASA, and without that customer, they probably wouldn't exist today. But if you look at their business today, with Starlink in operation, it's now, and they do a lot of commercial, non-government work, for other commercial, satellite operators and people who need various things in orbit. So I think, without access to the exact numbers, government is not their biggest customer anymore, and they've got other cash flows that are independent.
And speak to NASA has actually given a similar contract to a number of other contractors,
which have failed.
Bigger organizations.
Absolutely.
What does it say about entrepreneurs and big organizations? Why have the big organizations who've been around for a very long time? Shall we say their names? How come they have failed?
Yeah, we can say their names. I mean, we've got nothing to fear from them. So I think their biggest competitor in the early days is this joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed Martin called United Launch Alliance. Mm-hmm. But I think the failure of that business model is, okay, fine. Yes, we should criticize the boards and management of those businesses for failing to keep up and compete. But the incentive structure, you see, you tend to get what you incentivize, right? So the way that a lot of defense work is done, because what the military wants from technologists typically doesn't have commercial applications, right? Mm-hmm. So you as an entrepreneur, you've got no incentive to build or develop the stuff that the government wants to use to fight wars, right? So for the government to incentivize you to then work on their projects, what they'll say is, we want you to develop a technology that does X or Y, and we're going to pick up the costs of that development, and then we'll give you a margin on top of that, right? Mm-hmm. So now if you think about it on the, from the business's perspective, right? You have an incentive. The way you make more money is you build up costs, right? Because if you're getting 10% of $1 million, that's 100,000. But if you're getting 10% of $10 million, you're now making $1 million.
There's a perverse incentive. Yeah.
So the incentive when you're doing this kind of work for the government is for you to build costs, and that model works on when it comes to stuff that has no commercial applications or nobody would actually spend any energy trying to do. Mm-hmm. So, and the reason why SpaceX was able to be so disruptive is because they weren't coming in on that model. They actually wanted to cut costs. They actually wanted to build things that were
far more efficient.
Exactly. And compete.
In fact, that was their competitive advantage. That was like the unique proposition that they were offering to the industry.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
So from day one, they were scrappy. They were always front and center, imagining how they could do more with much less.
Do you know where the idea of an entrepreneur, in the French concept of entrepreneur, where it actually comes from?
Yes, rascals, basically, or something like
government contractors. Like, and Elon Musk was called an entrepreneur. The word entrepreneur were these rascals, buccaneers, who were one-man bands, who were disrupting the supply chain in government contracts because they could do things more efficiently. And they would get it wrong sometimes, but overall it was a win because they were doing things more efficiently than your usual old industries that were involved in it. And then that's where the word entrepreneur from the French concept comes from. So typically what Elon Musk is doing. So thinking about that, and let's maybe come back to Zim. If you think about it, or maybe let's stick with Elon, because I want you now to talk about the robots and Tesla and what's actually happening with Tesla. What happened? What was the event in San Francisco, and what's the impact of that?
Oh yeah, well, basically Tesla is I think in the public's imagination, it's perceived as a electric vehicle company, but in reality, what it is it's a technology company that's in the business of building electric vehicles. It's in the business of building artificial intelligence software to make vehicles self-driving. It's in the business of making humanoid robots. And last week, one of the things that they showcased was a robotaxi, like their design, their prototype of, basically this taxi that doesn't have a steering wheel, doesn't have pedals, it just has a screen. It's designed from the ground up to be self-driving, and that's the future of mobility.
How disruptive is this going to be, especially the robots and self-driving, especially with our trucks and, because that's a big industry, especially in the US, even in Africa.
Oh yeah, it's going to be disruptive on an epic scale. So just to put it into perspective and just share some numbers. So if you think about Uber in the US, an Uber ride is $3.71 per mile. And that's the cost. And $3 of that is actually the driver. So if you have a technology that makes the vehicle driverless, right, and therefore the driver redundant, and it's software that it's literally just running off a inference computer that's in the vehicle. So you remove that $3 cost, and all of a sudden the cost goes from $3.71 a mile to 71 cents a mile. That's massive, and that actually reduces the cost of mobility to less than the cost of owning a vehicle.
And it's safer?
Obviously, because the machine doesn't get tired, doesn't get drunk, it doesn't have any issues. So, and it keeps getting better the more miles the fleet does and the more it learns. I think it's dramatic. I think it's kind of
it's
like
extremely disruptive. But let's come to Africa, because I think robotics and the robots are going to be quite disruptive. And here there was an argument that was made in South Africa. I think someone made the argument that the thing why I would want a robot is it doesn't vote for the ANC.
That's hilarious.
Tongue in cheek. Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. But anyway, they were making a very important factor that if you think about it, we have a lot of casual labor and a lot of people, domestics in our households or in the gardens. And now you'll have a robot that doesn't get tired, that doesn't have a minimum wage, and can work 24/7, literally. Do you think it's going to be that disruptive?
Oh, it's definitely going to be disruptive.
And is that an impact that we will feel in Zimbabwe, in Africa? And how soon and how quickly are we going to experience it?
Oh yeah, we're definitely going to. It's definitely going to have an impact in this part of the world. I mean, one of the things that I find quite remarkable when I think about technology is, so if you think about, say, something like WhatsApp that all of us use every day, right? Nobody in this part of the world invested a penny in the research that built this product, or invested in any of the capital raising rounds that Jan Koen and his co-founders had to raise money to build that business. And yet here we are sitting in Harare, and the version of WhatsApp that you have on your phone is the same that the founder has wherever he lives in the world, right? It's the same, when you Google something, you're using the same version of Google that Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders of Google have, right? So there's a lot of evidence to tell us that technological breakthroughs, in other parts of the world have an impact on us here, right? Starlink has been trending as a topic of discussion over the last few weeks since it got licensed. And again, it's a company that's not based in Zimbabwe. We didn't put
any single cent at all.
We didn't put any money into it. We didn't put up any of the satellites. But lo and behold, here we are. We're benefiting from that development.
Directly, yeah.
So this technology, to the extent that it becomes mature, if you have these humanoid robots that cost 20,000-30,000, and they can work in places that are unsafe for humans, they'll definitely have an impact.
Well, that's the unsaid said, right? They haven't said it at all. Is military use. Do you think that that's going to be a?
Of course.
I mean, we know drones have played a big role in
the war in Ukraine, and
exactly. But I think robots are way more versatile, I would suppose.
Yeah, like every technology in and of itself is benign, right? So I can use a fire to keep you warm, or to burn you at the stake, right? Right. So it's just about my intentions, right? Mm-hmm. So somebody's gonna look at a humanoid robot and think, great, I can get it to do my laundry and household chores, and some other person is gonna think, hey, I can use that to shoot my enemies. So there's definitely going to be military applications of a lot of.
So, and let's talk about geopolitics, because what's actually happening in China? Because what Elon has showed us is what an entrepreneur, and this is just one entrepreneur. I mean, Google is doing something similar. Jeff Bezos is doing something similar. There are a lot of other guys, and not talking about just artificial intelligence, but a whole lot of innovative things that are happening in Silicon Valley. Well, not just Silicon Valley now, but in America. But I want to know, in terms of geopolitics, what's China doing in terms of technology? Where are they? Usually they're copycats, very good copycats. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with copycatting. I think Japan rose purely on the basis of, being a copycat. But how far advanced is China, and where is China?
I think China is very advanced. I think they're the world's second largest economy. They're the world's largest manufacturing hub. They're the world's factory. But I don't think that a lot of cutting edge innovation comes out of China. I could be wrong, but I have some guesses.
They've partnered with Google. The Chinese government has partnered with Google in some of their innovations, so there might be a there.
But Google itself doesn't work in China. Neither does X. Neither does a lot of
maybe the question should be, how replicable are these technologies? So let's say if Elon comes up with, and it's open source, I suppose, because a lot of the Tesla technology is
Tesla's
open source,
technology is open source, but SpaceX is not.
Well, the robots are Tesla, right?
Yeah, the robots are Tesla.
How easy is it to replicate? Can China take that technology and just replicate it, and then mass production, because that's what they're good at?
Yeah, look, I think copying is easy. I think the challenge is being at the cutting edge, right? So how quickly you innovate, because you don't want to buy a product that is running on technology that is 3 years old, right? You want to buy a 2024 technology, not a 2020 technology. Okay. So I think, to the extent that they're really good at replicating or copying, yeah, they won't be far behind. They'll be 2-3 years behind. But being on the cutting edge, you actually have to innovate.
Okay. So the final question around Tesla and what Elon is doing, that brings me some sort of excitement, because I've been a technology skeptic for a while. Don't you think that it's an exciting world where we are talking about real stuff and not social media? And, if you look at the last 15 years, the innovation really was around social media. And yet now we're talking about real significant things that can disrupt the world and change how we perceive the world.
Well, I'll push back on that narrative. I think social media gets a lot of coverage, right? People talk about it all the time and about how it's changed the world. And so some of this other stuff that's happening in the background is not as easy to understand. It's not as sexy, and it doesn't get as much coverage. So if you actually, one of the remarkable things,
Elon has made it sexy.
So one of the remarkable things that has happened over the last couple of weeks is so the Nobel Prize in chemistry went to one of the founders of Google DeepMind, for building this AI that can figure out how to unfold proteins. And so this is a chemistry Nobel Prize going to an AI person, right? And this down the road is likely to lead to novel drugs and treatments for diseases and that sort of thing, right? But most people don't know about this. Doesn't get a lot of coverage, but it's a big deal, right? So there has been a lot of significant technological advances that have been happening over the last 5-10 years, but we don't talk about them as much as we talk about what's happening at X or Facebook or
but then because they were the core face. You know, if you talk about so let's suppose that if Elon were to list SpaceX today, I think you and I can agree that it will get a very good valuation, and lots of people will be interested in the stock.
Yeah, already it's got a valuation of about 210 billion.
Yeah. So that's no different to what Facebook did, right? In 2007 or whenever they listed,
yeah,
right? Because they
captured the public's imagination.
And they were the epitome of technology. But if you look at, if we had had the same discussion around Facebook and the impact that it would have, I think that you would have found me less excited than what Tesla is actually doing or what Elon is actually doing now. I think that this is really exciting stuff because I can see how it's going to fundamentally change the world globally, not just America, but even here in Zimbabwe. And we've seen it with Starlink.
Yeah.
You know, so, and I think that that's something to be optimistic about. Maybe not overly so, because I think nuclear weapons are still with us, and that could, pose a very big threat with where we're going in terms of geopolitics. But let's come to Africa. Something again that was exciting in Africa is the Dangote refinery. I mean, it's now online. It's located in the Lekki Free Trade Zone in Ibeju, Lekki, Lagos, and stands as the world's largest single train oil refinery and one of the most advanced, with the capacity to process wide range of global crude types. And it has the potential to actually transform Nigerian economy. Do you want to speak to what brother Dangote is doing? And, because that's our equivalent to Elon, right, in Africa, and how significant that is, that investment. I mean, his net worth has already doubled because of that, and they're now producing oil.
Yeah, look, I think it's just, remarkable that Nigeria, which is one of Africa's largest oil producers over the last several decades, is only commissioning a refinery now. So for the longest time, they were importing petrol and diesel when they were major producers of crude oil. And that just speaks to a macroeconomic regulatory environment that discouraged the kind of entrepreneurship that we've seen with Dangote building.
Yeah. Well, the first 40 years, it was all state-owned. The state would partner with international oil companies like, BP and Shell and Total. And then they started liberalizing. And then these are the fruits of the full liberalization.
Absolutely. So this is what I wanted to highlight, the fact that, you get what you incentivize. And when you have a liberal free market where entrepreneurs can take these kind of risks and build these kind of things, these are some of the successes that you will enjoy. An oil refinery was never going to happen with the old dispensation.
Why not? Let's get into that. Why would government have been able to do it?
I mean, look, there's a good case study actually on the global stage. The world's largest, the country with the world's largest proven oil reserves is Venezuela, right? And before Nicolas Maduro, I think the guy running the place was Hugo Chavez. And in his infinite wisdom, he decided to nationalize the entire oil industry, and all the oil major companies exited, right? And since that point in time, oil production in Venezuela has been on the decline, right? Because the oil majors, not only do they bring capital to the table, they bring technology, they bring skills that are highly specialized and incredibly difficult to marshal together, right? Outside of that, the incentive structure, which is a global oil company. So, to the extent that in Venezuela, fuel shortages are normal, right? but this is the country with the world's largest proven oil reserves, right? It should be one of the richest countries in the world.
But Rufaro, please help me, because it's clear, right? So, okay, it's the state, and this state is incentivized to at least ensure that there's more revenue to the state. And if they own the oil companies, why are they not innovative enough to get the refineries going, whether it's Venezuela or it's in Nigeria? Could it be a question of just competing needs, that when you sit at the apex as the president of Nigeria, you have maybe 100,000 competing plans that are coming to you, and for you to be fully dedicated to a refinery means that literally all your time is dedicated to this particular thing. I think that governments take it for granted just what it takes, the wherewithal to actually get a refinery going, to get something going.
So I think it comes back to incentives, right? One of the interesting things that you mentioned when you introduced this topic of the refinery in Nigeria is that Dangote's net worth doubled, right? The guy's got skin in the game. It actually matters to his personal balance sheet whether he builds this thing or not, right? Mm-hmm. And he now has these bragging rights on the global billionaire list. He's gone up a few notches, right? Because he's successfully built this thing, right? Now, if you're a bureaucrat running,
you might not even get a vote.
Whether the thing fails miserably or is an incredible success,
you're still gonna get paid.
Does your salary change?
No.
If your political principles lose the next election, you get fired. So governments.
In fact, what you're saying, Rufaro, this is a good point. You're saying actually the costs of failure within government as a government bureaucrat are extremely high, because you can lose your job if it doesn't work.
Well, in a normal economy, there are parts of the world where you can fail
miserably and still
consistently year in year out.
Okay. But I think that the consequences of failure ensure that you just don't do stuff if you're a government bureaucrat. Which comes back to the theory, Max Weber, when he talked about bureaucracy and what bureaucracies can and cannot do. I think he was also very clear that that's why you need the private sector. That's why the private sector is probably the best place where this can happen, because of the incentive schemes, as you correctly said. But I think the idea to tinker and to play with these things, and when they fail, it's just one individual. It's not socialized. The losses are not socialized. Because if we think about this refinery, right, he raised money from private sector. I think it's close to 50 billion or more. If it had failed, if it was a government enterprise and it had failed, the cost of 50 billion on the Nigerian fiscus is huge. It's huge. And that's primarily part of the reason why it would never get a pass within government. Because people will say, okay, what are the costs if this thing doesn't work? Well, it would have cost us, $50 billion. That's probably all of their tax revenues for a year. So the cost is huge. Whereas if Dangote had failed, right?
He just loses a bunch of money, and his partners lose a bunch of money.
Him and his
and life
investors,
for the Nigerian state goes on.
It just goes on.
Which is, as
There's
it should
absolutely no loss at all. But the incentive for the next guy, for the next entrepreneur, is also there, because the next entrepreneur, either Dangote himself will give it a second shot,
or somebody else will come in.
Somebody else will come in and say.
An example. Remember what happened with initially? I think what is now being run by Zimplats. It was BHP.
Exactly.
Right? They came in. They poured in a bunch of capital, and it didn't work for them. And they said, you know what? We give up.
We're giving up.
We're exiting.
Yeah.
And then
And
Zimplats came into the and said, no, we think we can, you know,
We can do a better job.
And
And the cost to the Zimbabwean taxpayer, zilch. But if the Zimbabwean government had failed,
if it was the Zimbabwean government
which actually had failed, it means that that's it. There's no bureaucrat who's going to pick it up again.
absolutely.
Right? And that's the thing about private enterprise. The thing about private enterprise is you can give it as many tries as possible, and the losses are privatized. And with just a few individuals who are ready to take on the risk. And government is better off. And I think that's the message that we want to put across. So we have these two classic cases, and maybe just to use Trump's word, that we weave. He doesn't have direct logic, but he says, you know what, I weave. The story must weave. It's all connected. If you look at what Elon has done, if you look at what Aliko Dangote has done, what's the message to private sector in Zimbabwe and the message to government in Zimbabwe?
So I think, what we should be asking ourselves in this part of the world is, how do we create an environment that empowers the next Strives and Zs, people who are going to build fantastic businesses that create a lot of wealth, employ a lot of people, and just make everybody in this part of the world better off, right? What kind of environment significantly increases the chances that that kind of entrepreneurial energy will succeed, right? So instead of just having, 2 or 3 of these incredibly successful entrepreneurs over a 20, 30-year period, we have 30, we have 300, right? And what we saw in Nigeria, the reason why building this refinery was possible was because of liberalization, right? And the US, the reason why Silicon Valley attracts all these great minds from all over the world is because they have this culture, they have this framework where entrepreneurs can thrive. So we need to try and replicate that here. We need, Zimbabwe's challenges, in my view, are that it's incredibly difficult to do business.
Well, government wants to do everything.
So
look at Mutapa, for example. You'd think that Mutapa would congregate and say, guess what we're going to do? We're going to privatize. But guess what they're doing? They're acquiring.
Yeah, look, I mean...
oh my gosh.
So yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think our government here is obsessed with control. They want to do more instead of less. From where you and I sit, thankfully Ranga's not here, so we don't have to worry about anyone pushing back. But as libertarians, right, we actually believe that government should aspire to do as little as possible. Just get out of the way and be the referee, right? Let the entrepreneurs compete. And to the extent that some of them try to abuse their powers or behave badly, you come in as a referee and you say, no, that's not okay. But for the most part,
play fair.
You're not in the game, right? Whereas in Zimbabwe, what you have is, so you've got Strive, who's the entrepreneur. He's built this fantastic telecoms business called Econet, right? And the state that's supposed to be an impartial referee owns Telecel Net One, Tel One. That's in direct competition with Econet. So,
and they don't even pay license fees.
So and then we wonder why we don't see more Strives, right? I mean, it makes his achievements even more impressive, right? Because it's in spite of all these handicaps and challenges.
Similarly, in the credit market, government has crowded out private sector.
I mean, we don't know how many TBs are out there outstanding, But I would.
So our sober reality is that we've got 16-hour power cuts, and Zimbabwe Energy Regulatory Authority says the country loses at least 20% of supplied electricity because of obsolete equipment and other challenges. Zera Research and energy efficient engineer Victor Sibanda said the national grid connectivity and electricity access was at 62%, which is 80% in urban and 23% in rural. But it doesn't matter because we all are suffering 16-hour power cuts. And this is due to, Zimbabwe's power generation deficit is 400 megawatts. But
you see,
we're importing between 200 and 500 megabytes from neighboring countries. Why can't we get this right? Because energy is going to have a big impact on our GDP this year.
Because the state is involved and the state is inefficient and ineffectual.
But they've got independent power producers.
Yeah, so the level of regulation and uncertainty as well. So let's say that you're an energy entrepreneur.
And you supply ZESA, and ZESA doesn't pay you.
And you're incredibly excited. I mean, and it's not even a matter of whether they pay you or not, right? Mm-hmm. It's a currency question, right? So let's say they tell you that they're happy to pay a tariff of 16 cents a kilowatt hour, and they're happy to pay you in US dollars, right? Mm-hmm. And you're building a plant that costs $250 million US dollars with a useful life of 30 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So on paper, it sounds great. You have your financial analyst build a model, and it tells you that, look, if you're getting paid 16 cents a kilowatt hour over 30 years, the internal rate of return is fantastic.
Makes
great,
sense.
Right? Mm-hmm. But the question is, do you know what currency you'll be paid in
5 years?
2 years? 2 years? 5 years? In 2 years? Do you know what currency you'll be paid in? Right? Do you have any idea? Right?
No, you don't.
So why would you come? Like if you've got capacity to allocate $250 million US dollars to a project in Zimbabwe or Zambia or Kenya, right, or someplace where you know that if you look back over the last 20 years, the currency story has been consistent, right?
And stable.
Right. And yes, the return might be 5% lower in Namibia than in Zimbabwe, but you have high conviction that you're not going to have any currency issues over the next 30 years.
What you're saying, Rufaro, is very apt because it also tells us that the currency issues, we're ending up importing 500 megabytes. And that's huge. That's something that we are producing.
Not megabytes, but I think
megawatts.
You meant megawatts.
Megawatts. If you think about it, and we're losing about 20% because of obsolete equipment, and that's also very costly. And it comes back to currency because where are we getting the currency to import? And we didn't need to get the currency to import if we had a stable currency. So would you say that ZESA is the largest and the biggest casualty of the ZIG inconsistency or currency problems?
It's one of the biggest ones for sure. I think all of us are casualties. I mean,
because it's a double whammy, right? Because if you think about it, because now they're importing, that requires currency. Mm-hmm. And then you now have 16-hour power cuts. It means that people are not producing. And if they're producing, they're having to use diesel. And that's further imports.
Yeah, that's expensive as well.
And that's very expensive. Mm-hmm. So the country becomes a high-cost center, which it need not be if the currency was stable. Because then private producers would have just started producing. Because then they can raise capital. They can raise long-term funding.
It's difficult to overstate the negative impact on our economy of currency uncertainty. It's huge. There is probably, I can actually say with high conviction, there is, billions of dollars annually of potential investments that simply saying, nope, too hard. We're not doing that when it comes to Zim. Because of the currency question, right? So the underlying opportunity might be incredibly attractive. But at a high level, the capital allocator sits there and says to themselves,
it's not worth it.
I'm not. This is too hard. Well,
It's too hard. It's too hard.
What's currency going to look like after 2030? And then people start waffling, and then the guy says, what? That's too hard.
That's too hard. Yeah. So given that, and this is a question that we get all the time, then what does it mean for next year's budget? Or first the
this budget.
process.
I mean,
the budgetary process that's coming.
It's hilarious.
November.
Like we produce a local
away.
currency budget.
It's meaningless.
It's gibberish. Like I mean, if how do you make sense of a budget in Zig? Like, do you not? Because it's a budget that's supposed to the duration of the budget is a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you're told that the state is going to spend X amount of Zig over the next 12 months, what does that mean? Like, can you picture, X amount of Zig in April next year?
No, because we actually don't know what the devaluation will be. We don't even know if Zig is going to be there in November. The budget is actually presented.
So it's just one of those things that blows my mind. I find it incredibly vexatious that we have all this intellectual capital in Treasury putting together a Zig budget, that they themselves in a few months won't be able to make sense of. In fact, within days of producing it, they can't make sense of it. So, and we do this every year.
Why are we not learning?
We ought to have a US dollar budget. And because the market share of the local currency Zig is so small, and already year to date or since
that will certainly help. Even private sector, the local companies would also because they would follow suit, and then we just start producing US dollars. But can you even trust the US dollar budget?
Look, I think because we came from a US dollar era and we woke up in a local currency era. So definitely when you think about US dollar balances in Zimbabwe, they are not risk free, right? You could wake up one day and they've metamorphosized into.
But at least we can trust them.
But they're much better.
Because I'm aware we're running out of time. But
the producer's not here, so we can carry on.
Well, we've got a crew that is insistent on first starting on time and then ending on time, and then anyway, the question I have is, if you had a wish list, tell me your wish list for Mthuli's budget, given everything that's happening, and we talked about energy, because I think that's a big impact, that if we don't solve the energy problem, it's affecting right across the economy. The impact is actually huge. You're looking at, we could potentially lose 5 to 10% GDP because we are actually inefficient as far as energy is concerned. And because we're importing, that's a huge cost or misuse of our foreign currency. And if we could just get the currency question right, it would solve a lot of our problems.
Yeah, so if I was, I only have one item on my wish list. And if you ask me to list 10 items, I would list this one item 10 times. Sort out the currency. Just solve the currency issue. Just say, you know what, guys, we're liberalizing. I understand maybe politically it's impossible to abandon Zig and say, sorry, guys, we failed. Let's just put this unsuccessful currency out of its misery. I doubt that's.
But what's going to change?
I doubt that's ever going to happen.
But we'll have a new currency, and the new currency.
Let's just have a liberal currency regime, right?
Do you think that liberalizing the currency is what will solve the problem?
Absolutely.
How?
Because once it's liberalized, right, and people can trade at whatever rate they want, right? Then the state is competing in a free market. Right. If it wants the local currency,
it means that the local currency, will be depreciating every single day.
Well, that's up to the state, right? If they continue to print, then it will depreciate every day.
Do you honestly think that because they've liberalized the currency, they would stop printing?
No. But no, of course not. But what I'm saying is,
I think that your solution needs to be in line with the reality.
What will happen in reality, in my view, is if we liberalize, the local currency will lose massive market share, and we will transact mostly in US dollars. And if the state ever wakes up one day and decides they seriously want to promote a local currency and they wanted to gain market share, they'll
Okay,
have
so
to do
yours
things
is a
properly.
death wish.
No, it's not a death wish. I'm just saying.
It's a death wish. You're saying liberalize because you know that if they liberalize, they're not gonna stop printing, and that's the death of the local
but here's the thing. So actually, to quote Obama, reality is a way of asserting itself. Okay, so if you think about where we are today, right? We haven't liberalized. We still have exchange control and all these rules, right? But the zig is dying anyway, right? Mm-hmm. But in the current framework, nobody wants to invest in Zim, right? Because we're saying you're not liberalized, you've got all these currency challenges, right? At least if you liberalize and you make it the law that we are now liberalized, right? Then somebody who's sitting on a bunch of capital that they want to allocate to this part of the world can say, hey, you know what? Well, the law says I can move US dollars in and out. There's no exchange control. I can now consider Zimbabwe as a viable investment destination. Right now, you can't. ZIG is going to die in either scenario if government continues behaving the way it's behaving, right? But in a liberalized scenario, you actually have foreign capital flows. It's possible to engender foreign capital flows. In the current scenario, you're not getting any foreign capital flows. No one is shipping money into Zim. In fact, people are trying to ship it out.
Okay, so you're saying that the regulation of importing or taking your money
exchange
out.
Control.
Exchange control.
Yeah.
So I think that's a little different from currency issues. I tend to agree with you as far as exchange controls are, that liberalize exchange controls. But that's different.
Just do away with them completely.
Yeah. Do away with them completely. Because even with the current scenario, if you do away with exchange controls, people will invest. Right? Because they really don't care what's happening to ZIG. ZIG is a government currency, and they can play with it as far as they're concerned. It's like, a baby, arutamba. You throw them a toy, and they can play with their toy, and they can do whatever they want. But the reason why it has an impact on everybody is because of
not really friends
exchange.
With this guy. I don't agree with his...
It's exchange controls.
With his baby and toy example.
Because whenever I want to import, I certainly have to face exchange controls. Whenever I want to take my money out, if I'm an investor, certainly there's exchange controls. And that's how currency is then impacting on investors. Because now I have to queue to get my currency out. Mm-hmm. But if you do whatever you want, play with your toys, your baby toys, as government, but just allow industry, liberalize exchange control and allow industry to import and to take their money out and to do whatever they want in a multi-currency. I think that's the least we can ask for. Maybe that's something that is feasible and realistic. To say to...
And the universe of opportunity is
huge.
To
Mtuli, there are two issues here. There is the issue of currency and currency management, which we know that it's a very political thing, and you can have that. And you can continue playing with that. That's your toy. Play with it. Whether it's backed by gold, anchored by gold or not, we couldn't care less. That's okay, fine. But as far as exchange controls, can we liberalize exchange controls? Can investors come in and take their money out as and when they want to? And can importers, similarly, can they import whenever they want to? And can they trade currency whenever they want to? And as far as exchange controls are concerned, we need that liberalized, actually. So we've run out of time, and I haven't finished the book, and I'm hoping that next week you would have finished.
But I did see something quite interesting that you posted online about us
let's not talk about it. Let's talk about it next week when you've actually read the book. Because I think I'm going to be done this weekend. And then we want to focus on, because like I said, the CIO is a big, I know they watch the show, and they've got a large contingent of economists. So it was, from an interesting perspective, you want to know what sort of debates that they have within the CIO. Do they see things the way we see them? And why is it that reason doesn't prevail? Because these are, clever people, one would assume. Are they? Are they not? But maybe Bonyongwe can give us a light. So far, it's a little, I'm almost halfway done, and it's a little disappointing. There's not much as far as economics is concerned. But to be fair, He's been talking about his military history and what was happening in the military as a military man, and he's just moved into the CIO. So I'm hoping that maybe the next half will get some, interesting tidbits around the economy and how I'm still curious as far as how $100 trillion note was introduced. That imagine you, Farouk, you and I, we're in a boardroom and like, I think a bright idea is for us to produce $100 trillion note. And everybody said, yes. Mukuru, Magona. And we even sent it to the printers, and we even sent it to, the advertising agent.
Between the two of us,
somebody,
which one of us is actually drinking here?
Well, whoever decided we should have a $100 trillion note was certainly not in their right mind. But I'm curious to get an answer. I mean, I've read Gono's book, and he says, so Gono, as far as Gono is concerned, he says it was a national security issue. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's the end. That's as far as he goes. So I'm now interested in finding out from the security sector how they came up with this idea that this is how we defend Zim dollar. Like, print that note. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you guys think. We're always curious to find out what you guys think. Elon, Dangote, private sector, entrepreneurs, old organizations versus new entrepreneurs, failure and the socialization of failure. Well, not the socialization, but the loss. Who bears the losses? Is it government? Is it entrepreneurs? And how do we progress as a society? Are you guys as excited about technology and what's happening globally and how it can affect us in the next 20, 30 years or even earlier? Are you guys going to still have your domestic workers, or you would prefer to actually have a robot? That's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's the best time to be alive, for sure.
Certainly, I tend to agree with that. And it's affecting us. And those are the benefits of globalization, if you think about it. And that's something that I'm looking forward to. But otherwise, we're just going to enjoy the sun and have ourselves a wonderful Friday and enjoy our weekend. And we wish you also a lovely weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.